Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Welcome to the last episode of Lunch Money for 2021. Lunch Money is brought to you by Shareises. At Shareises, our purpose is to create financial empowerment for everyone.
And for those of you who are new to Lunch Money, we do these every Thursday at lunchtime. And this is a place where you, as investors, can hear from people leading some of the companies available on the Shareises platform and other investing experts.
Lunch Money is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. And so please, if you're listening to the podcast, take a moment to leave a rating and comment on Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it. I'm Gus. I'm Head of Investments at Shareises.
And I'm Alice. I'm a financial analyst at Shareises, so I work alongside Gus in the investments team. Before we get into today's discussion, we do have a small legal disclaimer. So investing involves risk. You aren't guaranteed to make money, and you might lose the money you started with. Any information we provide is general only and current at the time. And if you're looking for help with your investment choices, we recommend talking to a licensed financial advice provider. Finally, we won't be providing any personalised advice as part of this webinar.
Also, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions for our guests today, you can submit them through the Ask a Question button down below. Don't leave questions in the discussion area as they are likely to be missed.
Finally, please be kind and respectful towards our speakers and your fellow viewers. Otherwise, we will have to take steps to remove you from the webinar.
So today, Alice and I are joined, we're very excited to be joined by Greg Foran, who is the CEO of Air New Zealand.
Greg became the CEO of Air New Zealand back at the start of 2020 and is here to chat about his career and what it's been like to navigate an airline through the challenges of the pandemic. So welcome, Greg.
Kia ora.
It's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. Firstly, I'm really interested to learn more about your career journey and how you became the CEO of Air New Zealand. So prior to being the CEO of Air New Zealand, you were the president and chief executive of retail giant Walmart's US operations. Really what inspired you to take this role?
Well, a couple of things. My wife and I had been out of the country for 25 years and we were thinking at a point of returning to New Zealand, and this opportunity presented itself. I must admit, when I was contacted, I said, I have no idea why you're talking to me. I'm an old broken down shopkeeper and I know nothing about aeroplanes apart from the fact that I travel on them as a customer. So I'm flattered that you've asked, but you probably should go and talk to some airline people. Anyway, they persevered and I thought some more about it and decided to put my hat in the ring. And I was honestly a bit surprised when I got the job, but thrilled at the opportunity, and it gave my wife and I a good entry back into the country of our birth and a chance to come back to New Zealand, having been away for so long.
Awesome. And tell us a little about like Walmart's US operations and what that meant. What did you do there? Because that's a huge company. Huge company.
Yeah, it is. Well over, 500 billion in turnover a year and, employs about 5 million people. The US business is obviously a significant part of that. It's where the company started from. Began as a small retail, if you like, variety store coming up 60 years ago. And by a gentleman called Sam Walton, who had a view that what he wanted to do was help people save money so they could live a better life. And, it's always important to have a reason for getting out of bed in the morning, and that's something which is stuck to everyone who works at Walmart from the very beginning till right now. The US business comprises about 5,000 retail stores, about 1.3 million associates, which is their word for staff. And over the last, in particular, 5 to 7 years, has built out a reasonably significant e-commerce business as well. So, my responsibility was to run that US business. It makes up about 80% of the Walmart Group's overall profit, and develop it out and make sure that it would be fit for the future.
So just moving on a little bit to the next part of your career, which is, of course, being the CEO of Air New Zealand. You took on this role and then almost straight away the pandemic hit and, the New Zealand government announced it was closing our borders. I mean, what was that like, and what went through your mind when that announcement came out?
Well, I learnt two words that have stuck with me now for the last 21 months. And you're right. On the day I started, the very first meeting we had, I remember it vividly, we spoke about withdrawing the first of our flights, and they happened to be from Auckland to Shanghai. And progressively over the next 6 weeks, we actually ended up shutting down the entire network. So the two words that have stuck with me since the 3rd of February 2020 have been panic slowly. And those are two very important words, because what we've found here is that we're dealing in such uncharted territory, uncharted for airlines, uncharted for the country, many things beyond your direct control. So you've got to have a degree of patience, a degree of grit to get through it. But then you also can't go into your shell and not get on and develop a strategy, make good, clear, conscious decisions, because we are going to emerge out of this. And I think what we're seeing now is, to quote Winston Churchill, the beginning of the end. And you got to get yourself ready for that. There's no point in having gone through all the pain not to emerge stronger and better than what you were before you went into it.
I love that, panic slowly. That's a great two words, and definitely one for the times. You've been continuing to panic slowly through this. How was the update on Friday about the Omicron variant? How did that kind of impact your thinking, or is the thinking and the strategy resilient enough to weather this kind of change, I suppose?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think we are resilient enough to enter this. We described the airline well over a year ago now as going through sort of three phases. We had to survive, we would revive, and then we'd thrive. And what we found is that we got ourselves from survive to revive back in about April of this year, and then suddenly we had Australia shut down, and then we've had all the domestic shutdowns with Delta. So we're back and survived. So we've developed a resilience, a grit, and it's almost like getting to the top of a mountain and then finding that you've got another one to climb. So, we get the good announcements on Wednesday, Thursday about opening up potentially in a more open manner through to Australia and then the rest of the world, albeit that it would be home isolation, to then suddenly find on Friday night that we were dealing with a new variant. So panic slowly. We don't know much about this variant at the moment. It could turn out to be quite difficult for us. It could turn out to be status quo, or actually it could turn out to be quite favourable because it dominates Delta, and actually this is the beginning of the end of COVID. The answer is we don't know. And so in light of that, take the information you've got on hand, run your play, and we'll know a lot more in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, another aspect for Air New Zealand, that's been impacted by COVID over the last 20 months since your day one, were your plans to raise capital, to fund the business. So back in February, it was indicated that you would do a capital raise by the end of June. This was then pushed back to September, and now you're looking like the first quarter of 2022. Can you kind of talk to us a little about why this timeline has been delayed, kind of the considerations that you think about as a company when you're choosing to raise capital, and also the funding facility from the government and how the government has stepped in to help you through this process?
Yeah, it has been complex, hasn't it? And, I think, the volatility of what we're dealing here gives you a hint of the approach that we've taken. And not all the airlines have adopted the same approach. Some have gone very early and got out and raised capital, and then had to go back and raise more capital or go out and raise more debt. We've had the benefit of having, a Crown loan facility in place since very early on in this piece. And each time we've sort of had a look at the capital raise, we've, judged, the ability of having that debt facility in place versus going out to the market and raising capital when it's been difficult to provide some surety around what's going to happen with borders. And, we got to a point progressively as this has gone on to say, well, let's wait till we get a little bit more surety. And, we thought that we were feeling in a good position about the middle of last year and we're looking at doing something then. And then, of course, we had the outbreak of Delta in the country, and that led us to say, look, the best thing to do now is to put a ring around, all things playing out. Let's try and get a capital raise underway before the end of the first quarter. And that's still our thinking today. Reserving the right, of course, that if something difficult happens and we may need to change. But at this point, we're reasonably comfortable. That would make sense. There'd be some surety for us as an organisation, but importantly, surety to investors that, they would be putting money into a business that had clear line of sight to when 2/3 of its operation starts to get up and running, because we're a business where we're about 1/3 domestic, 2/3 international.
That's cool. Yeah. Thanks for that summary. It's been a really interesting story to follow, and to see how the government has jumped in has played a piece in that. And I think Alice has a question around that now.
Yeah. Sort of as Gus mentioned, you've had this funding facility from the government, and some Air New Zealand investors might not realise that the Crown or the New Zealand government is actually a majority shareholder in Air New Zealand. Can you tell us a bit about how that influences the way that Air New Zealand operates and makes decisions?
Yeah. It actually doesn't influence a lot in terms of the day-to-day operations of the business. Obviously, if you're talking about a capital raise and they're almost 52% shareholder, I think they hold 51.9 is the exact number, then clearly there's going to be a lot of discussions because, they are going to, in all likelihood, maintain that shareholding going forward. And we think that's a fine position to be in. We've got a responsibility to New Zealand Inc. as well as to the rest of our shareholders. So, in terms of raising capital, we're obviously closely aligned. When it comes to the operations of the business, that's actually something which we do. And, for me, if you like, as an outsider coming into airlines, I think that's very appropriate because airlines are quite a tricky business. They have very expensive assets. You've got to get these planes flying regularly, otherwise your costs can go through the roof. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of complexity, partnerships required, alliances required. And so the running of the business day to day is something that we get on and do. And, where we do line up during a period like COVID is something like cargo. And, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm really grateful, actually, for what we're able to do with cargo. It's good for the country because we're able to keep exports that are very important moving and importing products, particularly some of the requirements around, health that we need at the moment coming into the country. Number two, financially, it's been beneficial for us. And, the reality is there's been some weeks here, particularly over this recent period where we've been in level 4, not just in the whole country, but Auckland has been in lockdown where we do more business in cargo than what we do in passenger revenue. And the third thing, which we shouldn't underestimate, is how important cargo has been to keep the international fleet operating. So many of our competitors actually shut down their international fleets, like Qantas. They moved freight because they have a freight business. We actually have been able to move the best part of 80 to 90,000 people back to this country through repatriation flights on the back of being able to keep cargo going. And the important thing here is that it keeps our networks warm. So we don't lose slots in airports. Our pilots are still flying, so they're currently trained. So when we do get to turn on the business again internationally, it's actually a bit easier for us than it is for some of our competitors to get restarted.
That's fascinating. So many moving parts there. I'd never thought about the keeping the slots at the airports. Yeah, we actually had someone who was working at Shareises for us for a period who was an Air New Zealand pilot. So he's gone back to his role now, which is but it's really cool to see that everything's ready there to ramp up again. So another question here, with the government announcing its plan to phase out the MIQ system that's been in place since the start of the pandemic, it really feels like international travel might be starting to recover. What are your views on when this will happen? And my other question, kind of follow-up question from that one, is what do you think air travel will look like post-pandemic? I understand that per annum, Air New Zealand used to fly about 17 million passengers per year. That might be a little bit off, but yeah, really interested to hear what you think about what it will look like in 2023.
Yeah.
Or longer term.
So look, so much of it depends on decisions that we don't make. We're dependent on really the decisions that the government makes, and they've been very clear that this is a health-led decision-making process. And we've seen that play out. We're a bit slower opening up than many other countries, but we've probably been a safer place to live in. And, we haven't suffered so many deaths and we haven't had so much COVID through the community. And that's been off the back of some good decision making. And we also have to acknowledge that being a small island nation has probably helped us. In terms of how the government takes it forward from here, I'm not sure. I don't have that role, but I think if we said to ourselves, what they're likely to do in the future is reflective of what they've done in the past, they're going to be cautious. And so much of their decision-making is going to get driven around, what's going to be the capacity in hospitals and in particular ICUs to cope with any significant outbreak. And so, what we're seeing in January, the initial relaxation of people who are New Zealand citizens or permanent residents being able to come back into New Zealand, but no one else, and that's only for those in Australia. And you still have to do home isolation, and you still have to do a COVID test before you leave and when you arrive, and you must be vaccinated. So, there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand for that initially, because people, the only way they could get in previously was if they had an MIQ slot. But you can see what they're doing is they're just releasing the handbrake a bit, and then in the middle of February, they'll release it a bit more and say, actually, it's not just Australia now, it's any New Zealand citizens or permanent residents from around the world, but you still have to do the COVID tests and the home isolation. And then they've indicated that in April that they will look to open that up to anyone else. So these are people who are not New Zealand citizens or permanent residents, but they haven't indicated whether you're going to have to do some isolation. And they haven't indicated whether that will be the same for every country or not. So, look, the best I can speculate is by the time you're sort of getting to April, May, you're going to see a continued relaxation of what's expected. And it's only until you actually take the handbrake off altogether that Air New Zealand really starts to soar. Because as long as there's friction, you do dampen demand a bit. Even if it's as simple as you have to have a COVID test before you get on the plane. That's an extra, it could be $200 on the cost of your flight. And if you've got to do one at the other end, then it's $400. And if you're traveling with a family of four, then that's $1,600. So will we get to that point? Pretty sure we will. I'm pretty sure that as COVID plays itself out and does what we expect it will do, we'll get to a point where the friction goes away. What do I expect then? I think it's going to take some time for the business to get back to its former state. And I think probably the single biggest area that's going to be impacted for a period of time is going to be business travel. And that's because we've got a lot better at doing what we're doing today. And it doesn't mean it won't come back. I think people are going to enjoy getting out there and getting face-to-face, and they are going to want that physical connection. But I don't think it's going to come bounding back immediately. I think this will take a few years for it to come back. we're certainly geared ourselves up to deal with that, the way we've thought about our fleet and where we want to fly. But, there are a lot of, if you like, what-ifs still to play.
Panicking slowly, though.
Yeah, and look, we'll love it if this thing bounces back, and trust me, if it does, we're going to be there to take it all.
Yeah.
But we'll just have to wait and see. And as I said, I don't think averages help you in these things. I think you actually have to get the telescope away and get the microscope out and say to yourself, what do I think is going to happen in this country versus that country versus people traveling to visit friends and relatives versus people going on holiday versus business. So you've got to break all of that down and then build it up again.
It's really interesting, Greg. Now, for a slightly different, on a slightly different note, something that our Sharesies investors are quite passionate about is sustainability. And Air New Zealand has committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Can you tell us a bit about your plans on how, Air New Zealand is going to do that?
Yeah, sure. First thing I'd say to you is that we think this is the biggest issue that we've got on the horizon. So COVID will do what COVID does, but I think the one that doesn't go away is sustainability. And, I've watched this play out in the 5 different countries that I've worked in and lived in over the last 25 years. And it's here, and we want to deal with it. There are 3 things that we need to do in Air New Zealand. And in no particular order, they sort of are going to happen concurrently. To deal with Longhaul, we're going to have to come up with a solution around sustainable aviation fuel. And that's because the technology is decades away from solving how you're going to fly an electric plane or a hydrogen electric plane for anything over sort of an hour. And of course, airlines have got to be safe. So the solution is going to be sustainable aviation fuel, and we are working on that in concert with other industry players in New Zealand and the government. The second thing that we've got to do is we've got to push hard on the electric or green hydrogen electric option. And I stress green because if it's not green and you're just producing hydrogen, you may as well just be using fossil fuels. So we've got to sort out how to get that up and running, and there's once again a lot of discussion around that. You got to source that product. You got to transport the product, which has its challenges because it's considerably more voluminous than fossil fuels. And then importantly, you've got to work with the aircraft manufacturers to design planes that can fly. But here's the good news. That is a great solution for our domestic network. So when you think about our turboprops, and we've got a couple, Q300s and ATRs, a lot of them are flying 45 minutes, 50 minutes, not too many over 60 minutes, generally carrying sort of 50 to 70 people. It would be terrific that in a decade to have an Air New Zealand domestic network that was fundamentally green hydrogen electric or just electric aeroplanes. The third part of the puzzle, which is incredibly important and can't be underestimated, is to fly efficiently. And that can be by using technology to get a better route between here and New York. And if you think about the way that digital has gone and the way the information is available, and you can track weather patterns, you get much more real-time data. So flying more efficiently in more efficient aeroplanes. So the next set of 787 Dreamliners that we've got will be even more efficient than the ones that we've got at the moment. We've got GE engines on the next lot, and I think they're about 2% more efficient than the current Rolls-Royce engines. 2% mightn't sound much, but in a business like Air New Zealand, where you're burning a lot of fuel, that makes a heck of a difference. And then the 2 other components of that are critical is that you want to get the planes as full as you can, and you want them full with as much cargo as you can. so that you are utilising that metal tube completely. So to win in sustainability, to hit net zero by 2050, we're going to need sustainable aviation fuel. We're going to need electric and green hydrogen and electric. And then we've got to have the most efficient fleet, and we have to fly it more efficiently than we ever have. We're going to make that happen.
It's awesome to hear. Yeah, that definitely resonates with a lot of our base. And I'm just looking through, there's a couple of questions about hydrogen in particular now. So I think now we're through the main kind of pre-prepared questions. We're going to just jump into the questions that have been asked by some of the listeners today. So I think we'll kick off with saying, and just a quick reminder that we don't provide personalized financial advice here, but a question that's really popular is, do you think the current share price actually represents future value of the business? So I think maybe we'll change it to be as like, is there anything that our investors should be really thinking about when they're looking to value or value Air New Zealand shares or make an investment in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to comment on the share price for obvious reasons. So, the market determines the price of the shares, and the market is the market. So I'll just leave it at that.
Cool. So how regularly is the government engaging with Air New Zealand about the opening of the international border? Are they regularly engaging with Air New Zealand, or is that a conversation that's kept completely separate?
If it's not daily, it's every second day. I can guarantee you that it is never more than about 3 days that we are not engaged in discussions around either domestic borders and the domestic restart, or Cook Islands, Tasman, or what we call Longhaul. So it's constant, and it needs to be constant because we're talking about such volatility and changing information.
Cool, thanks for that. Another question was around, like, I've been fortunate enough to go to the Quarterly Club before, but there's a question here about what is Air New Zealand's innovation and loyalty strategy going forward?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And, as we think about our strategy, and, the important point here is we haven't been sitting on our hands over the last 20 months sort of going, well, gee, this is tough, we can't fly. And we did, unfortunately, have to let go a third of our workforce during this period, which has been unbelievably challenging for not only those that have gone, but those that have stayed, because we're such a proud organisation. But we haven't been sitting on our hands, and we have a great strategy. We call it Kia Mau, get ready, and that's so appropriate. And as we think about that strategy, you can guarantee that loyalty plays a part in it. Now, the other two areas that you're going to see us delve into is we want to grow our domestic business, we want to optimise our international, and we want to lift our loyalty business. Now, the great thing about our loyalty business is that, as a percentage of the population, we probably have more loyalty members, AirPoints members, than Amazon does Prime members. So we've got well over 3.5 million AirPoints members. And so we want those people engaged in the ecosystem that we want to create around Air New Zealand. So there's been a lot of work. An area that we've just recently announced is a partnership with the Hum Group to develop our own credit card solution where you'll be able to earn even more air points. We've expanded, the amount of partners that you can earn points with and spend points with. We're having a look at our tiers and how they're going to operate. We've just invested a lot in a new back-end system that's going to allow us to put in even more features. So we see a loyalty business here, which is critically important, and one of the three growth areas, along with growing domestic and optimizing international. So vitally important to us.
We've got another question here, which is around the long haul routes and when they'll be looking to opening up. So you've touched on that one in the thinking around that, and it's a slow process. Kia Mau, be ready for it. But there's a specific piece around the 787 and whether you'll be doing ultra long range flights.
Yeah, look, we really like the Dreamliner. We think it's a plane which is incredibly well suited to New Zealand, and probably COVID has assisted us. I suspect that certainly for a period of time, people are going to be very interested in flying point to point, as opposed to going into a hub and then having to hang around an airport and catch either another carrier or, another onward journey. And that's one of the reasons that New York excites us, for example. So, we geographically are in a great position here in New Zealand with the development and technology to fly directly to New York. Now, it's about a 17, 18-hour flight, a bit further on the way back because you're generally coming into a headwind. But that ability to get on that plane and then get off the other end, whether you're in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Houston, Narita, Shanghai, is very, very valuable. And so, what we've done is we've taken COVID to retire our 777-200s earlier than we should have. We're not bringing those back. There's 8 of those. So we've effectively reduced our long-haul fleet by a third by not bringing those back during this period. The 777s will keep as we restart, but they're starting to get to end of life. So over the next few years, we end up with a single long-haul fleet, 787s. And you're going to see lots of new development on those planes in terms of seat and customer offerings that are going to be quite unique. And our objective actually is to create the greatest flying experience on Earth. And we think that's important because we fly longer routes than almost any other airline because of where New Zealand is spaced and placed. And a lot of those flights are overnight. And people want to sleep and they want to get a good sleep. So you can expect to see lots of innovation, which we'll start talking about in the very near future, around how we're going to create a long-haul experience here, which is really going to be out of this world.
That's exciting. I remember seeing pictures of those flights, or some of the planes that are now sitting in the deserts, and I imagine there might be some older Air New Zealand planes there as well.
There are. There's 8 777-200s at the moment, and we've got 4 of those for sale if anyone would like to put an offer into us.
Taking bids.
Great. I've got a question here from Logan, who's asked, what countries do you feel will be prioritised in terms of potentially opening up to international travel in 2022?
We are pretty clear on where we want to fly to, but of course some of this is going to be dependent on how the government views a country as a risk. But you probably already get a sense of how important North America is going to be to us. And I do know that Vancouver's in Canada, but that's a critical route for us. And so we need to get back there and get up and running. It's also critical to maintain relationships. So United is an incredibly important partner for us, as is Singapore. So you can expect us to be getting back to Singapore as quickly as we can so that people can do the onward journey either through other parts of Asia or up into Europe. China remains critical for us, both in terms of passengers and in terms of freight. And Japan has always been a very important market to us. So that gives you a hint of sort of the long haul flying. Australia, goes without saying, is vital to us, and the Cook Islands, absolutely a part of our DNA, and we want to be back there. Now, I would never say never to anything else because so much of this is going to unfold over the next sort of 6 to 12 months that if we see an opportunity, we'll take it. But I've given you a pretty clear sense of where we think we want to go based on the scenarios that we've got in front of us at the moment.
I look forward to sort of seeing, what lies ahead in the future. Now, this question is from Alex, who's asked, when will Air New Zealand reinstate dividends?
That's a decision that will rest with the board, and that in turn will rest with the recovery of the airline and how that all plays out. And, we'll just have to wait and see. The most important thing at the moment is to get the health of the airline back and get up and running. And it's been a tough couple of years. We've posted some incredibly high losses, and we want to get this business restarted. We felt the beginnings of that in the middle of this year. We had a really purple patch there from April through till about July when domestic was running strong. In fact, domestic in July in Air New Zealand was the biggest July the company's ever had. in the history of Air New Zealand, and Tasman was starting to get back to its former self. So we want to get the business back up and running, deal with that, and then we'll worry about dividends when the business is in a healthy position.
Absolutely. Now, this question here is more related actually to Air New Zealand customers, and it's how will the vaccine pass link to the new Air New Zealand app?
Yeah, look, I'm so proud of what the team have done here. I've literally just come off a stand-up meeting that we've had in the business, and one of the things we've been focusing on over this period is how do we move even faster in Air New Zealand? How do we develop the agility to pivot and move quickly? So as soon as we got our hands on the vaccine pass, and we've got to remember that was really only put out there, about 2-3 weeks ago. We have had a cross-functional team working pretty much 7 days a week to be able to link the Air New Zealand app into the My Vaccine Pass. So what's going to happen is that on December the 14th, when we are requiring people to either be vaccinated or to have had a COVID test 72 hours, for those who are vaccinated who have the My Vaccine Pass, which you should have because you're going to need it to get into a bunch of other places, it's effectively just going into the Air New Zealand app and getting into the menu, one touch of the button, and that will upload that vaccine pass into the app. Not the details of it, it will simply just be a green tick that you're good to go, and that will then allow you to get your boarding pass. So you're not going to be able to get your boarding pass unless you have completed that step. Now, if you haven't got the Air New Zealand app, and obviously it's easier if you do, but if you haven't, then it's just simply a matter of taking the My Vaccine Pass and taking it to a kiosk and scanning it, and that will release your boarding pass. Now, the beauty of this solution is that it's reasonably seamless, and it means we don't have to check whether people are vaccinated because you're not going to get your boarding pass unless you are vaccinated. Now, for the very few number of people who aren't vaccinated, they're going to have to show a COVID test, and we have rolled out during this period digital devices to our team to be able to then release the boarding pass for those people who aren't vaccinated. There's only 2 airlines that I'm aware of in the world that have mandated domestic travel. We're the only one that have done it ourselves. The other one is Air Canada, and that was mandated by the government. We made this decision because 2 things. Number one, we were getting a lot of feedback from our customers that they were pleased that we did what we did internationally, and could we please do that domestically? And that was very strong. And then the second reason, that we've done this is clearly we think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And it makes a lot of sense. And having seen what's happened with Omicron over the last couple of weeks, the last couple of days, I'm so pleased we've done this. So 14th will be when it gets all turned on. We'll actually have it turned on for a bit of a soft launch on the Monday beforehand, the 13th. Our people are trained up. The teams have done a fantastic job. They've worked well with the Ministry of Health. They've worked well with MATTA, who have been assisting the government. And I think you're going to like the way that we've pulled this together.
Cool. That's exciting. Seamless. So one more question from Grace. And so this was, what advice would you give to young graduates just starting their career?
Oh, it's a good question, and one that I've been asked previously. I think maybe the first thing that crosses my mind is find something that you like doing, and don't get too caught up with what that might be or what the future projections are going to be. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I left school, and it was my mother who said to me, well, I think you should go and become a management trainee at what was then Woolworths. This is before it became Countdown. And I happened to be living in Hamilton at that stage. And I said to her, look, I'm not too sure I want to go and work in a retail store. I had much more interesting things on my slate, but my mother is persuasive, as they often are, and so I took the job. I had no idea that, 35 years later, I would have an opportunity to run the largest retailer in the world, Walmart US. I had no idea that would ever happen. In fact, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, did I think I would have that opportunity, I would have said to you, no. But the reality is I love doing what I'm doing. And when you like doing what you're doing, then you put the extra yards in. You become a lifelong learner. You take risks. You're prepared to accept failure because there is failure along the way. And you get on with it. And, I found the same thing with airlines. So I had no idea I wanted to do this job, 3 years ago. If someone had said to me that I would be doing this job 3 years ago, I would have said to you, you're nuts. It's not even on my horizon. But the more I thought about it, the more excited I became about it. And I also saw it as a challenge that after 40 years as a retailer, could I actually learn something new? And because there are some similarities that you can take across, but there are many things that you have to learn, and you've got to intellectually apply yourself to this. And, you've got to understand the business performance, because if you don't, you can't make good decisions. You've got to understand the strategy fundamentals. Where do you make money? How do you make money? What's the fastest growing part of your business? Where are your customers gravitating to? And then finally, you've got to understand the market and competitor dynamics. So I've had to learn all that. In retail, I sort of knew it because I'd started there when I was 17. I'd worked in multiple countries. It was sort of second knowledge. But for me, it's been like a breath of fresh air to go into an industry now where I've had to start effectively at the bottom to learn these things. Because if I can't do that, I can't get the whole of the game in my head. And if you can't get the whole of the game in your head, you can't add value to an organisation.
Oh, that's a great note to finish on. Thanks for that, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the time. Really appreciate the time. We've got, I mentioned before, we've got almost 100,000 of our customers that or our investors that hold some Air New Zealand shares. You're an awesome brand, and I'm sure a lot of them are your customers too. So yeah, thanks for sharing your journey and chatting about Air New Zealand.
Well, thank you, and can I say to all your listeners, thanks for your support. And the fact you have an ownership in the company is terrific. We put an option out there for a number of our staff to take shares in the company or take $1,000 bonus. And the majority said, we want shares in the company. And I'm so encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the support we get from New Zealanders all around the place. And, while airlines have been tough, tourism have been tough, hospitality has been tough, we know it's going to come back. And we want to come back even better than what we were. And we'll do that by all the support that we're getting from you and all your investors. So thank you. And on that note, I'd just like to say have a wonderful Christmas, a very merry one. If you're flying with us, enjoy it. We're looking forward to getting completely up and running on December the 15th because Auckland's been shut down for 107 days. And I hope to see many of you on board our flights during that period. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate those comments as well. And what really resonated with me just before was when you said you never know, when you go out into your career, what opportunities are around the corner. And if you'd told me, 12 months ago, I'd be sitting here chatting to the CEO of such an iconic Kiwi company, I wouldn't have believed them. But thank you again for your time. And thank you to everyone also who's tuned in today. As we mentioned right at the start, this is the last episode of Lunch Money for the year. So you can keep an eye out on our social media accounts to find out what's happening when we return in the new year.
In the meantime, if you'd like a dose of the Shareises podcast, you can check out our daily financial news podcast daily. It's called Recap. It's around 10 minutes long and published at 5 p.m. Monday to Fridays on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.
And enjoy the rest of the year and stay safe, everyone.
See you later all.